First story, by Sarah Miller. I always loved the idea of living away from the chaos of the city. So, when I found a charming cabin nestled deep in the woods of upstate New York, I jumped at the opportunity to make it my own. It was my perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of city life. Little did I know that one fateful night would shatter my idyllic dream. The cabin was rustic, a quaint two-bedroom retreat surrounded by tall pine trees. I moved in during the late fall, just as the leaves were turning to shades of red and orange. The solitude was refreshing, and I quickly settled into a peaceful routine. One evening, with the wind howling outside and rain tapping at the windows, I curled up on the couch to read a book. The only light came from the flickering fire in the fireplace. My solitude felt complete, and I relished it. As I turned the pages of my novel, I began to hear a faint scratching sound, almost like someone was dragging their nails along the outside of the cabin. I dismissed it as the wind and the rain playing tricks on my ears. But the sound persisted, growing louder and more insistent. I set the book aside and approached the window cautiously, pulling the curtain aside just a fraction to peer outside. In the dim moonlight, I saw a figure standing near the edge of the woods. It was a man, dressed in ragged clothes soaked by the rain. He was staring directly at the cabin. My heart raced, and I backed away from the window, my mind racing with fear. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but then I hesitated. What if it was just a lost hiker seeking shelter? I decided to be cautious but not jump to conclusions. Minutes turned into hours, and the man didn't move. He just stood there, staring at my cabin. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his presence alone sent shivers down my spine. Finally, unable to bear the tension any longer, I dialed 911 and whispered my address to the dispatcher. As I waited for the police to arrive, the scratching sound on the cabin's walls continued, now accompanied by a low, guttural muttering. I couldn't make out the words, but it sent a chill down my spine. The man outside was growing more aggressive, and I feared for my safety. When the police finally arrived, they found the man still outside, his face twisted in an expression of rage. He was armed with a knife and resisted arrest fiercely. It took 3 officers to subdue him and take him into custody. They told me he had a history of mental illness and had escaped from a nearby psychiatric facility. He had been wandering in the woods for days before stumbling upon my cabin. The scratching on the walls was his attempt to get inside. I shuddered at the thought of what might have happened if I hadn't called the police. My peaceful retreat had turned into a nightmare, a reminder that even in the tranquil woods, danger could be lurking just beyond the trees. Second story, by Mark Johnson. I had agreed to house sit for my friend, Mike, while he and his family went on vacation. It seemed like an easy way to make a little extra cash, and I figured it would be a relaxing week in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Little did I know that those 7 days would be anything but peaceful. The first night was uneventful. I settled into Mike's cozy house, enjoying the solitude and the change of scenery. The next morning, however, things took a strange turn. I heard footsteps in the hallway when I knew I was the only one there. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination, but the sounds persisted. I cautiously explored the house but found nothing out of the ordinary. I chalked it up to the house settling or perhaps some noisy neighbors. That night, I double-checked all the locks before going to bed. The following evening, the strange occurrences continued. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter coming from the living room. My heart pounded in my chest as I tiptoed toward the source of the sound. There, in the dim light, I saw the silhouette of a young boy sitting on the couch, playing with a toy. I froze. I didn't know Mike had a child, and he certainly hadn't mentioned anyone else being in the house. The child turned his head to look at me, and in the darkness, I could see his eyes gleaming with an eerie, unnatural light. It was then that I realized he wasn't a child at all. With a burst of adrenaline, I flicked on the living room lights, and the figure disappeared, leaving only the toy behind. I searched the house again, but there was no sign of anyone. I called Mike, but he assured me there was no child and no toy in the house. As the days passed, the unsettling events continued. Objects would move on their own, and I would hear whispers and laughter in empty rooms. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, and the house took on a sinister atmosphere. On the last night of my house-sitting duties, I decided to stay awake and confront whatever was causing the disturbances. I armed myself with a flashlight and waited in the living room. Just after midnight, I heard the laughter again, and the room grew cold. I shone my flashlight toward the source of the sound, and there, in the beam of light, was a shadowy figure. It was a woman, her face contorted into a grotesque smile, and her eyes glinting with malevolence. She whispered something in a language I couldn't understand, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. Summoning every ounce of courage, I yelled at the figure to leave, and the room seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. With a final, chilling laugh, the woman vanished into thin air, leaving behind an overwhelming silence. When Mike returned from vacation, I told him about my experiences, expecting him to think I was crazy. To my surprise, he didn't seem surprised at all. He confessed that strange things had been happening in the house for years, and he had hoped I could finally put an end to it. I left Mike's house that day, thankful that I wouldn't have to face whatever haunted it ever again. But the memory of those eerie encounters still haunts my dreams, a reminder that even the most ordinary-looking houses can hide dark secrets. Third Story, by Emma Turner. I had just moved into a cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Boston. It was my first time living alone, and I was relishing the freedom and independence that came with it. Little did I know that my newfound solitude would soon be shattered by a series of disturbing phone calls. It was a crisp autumn evening, and I had settled into my new home with a glass of wine and a good book. The apartment was small, but it was perfect for me, with its large windows that let in the soft glow of the streetlights outside. The silence of the night was comforting, and I felt completely at ease. Around 9 p.m., my phone rang, and I answered without thinking. The voice on the other end was deep and raspy, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "I see you," the voice said, and then the line went dead. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It had to be a wrong number, I told myself, trying to shake off the unease. But just as I started to relax, my phone rang again. This time, the voice was even more sinister. "You can't hide," it whispered before hanging up. My hands were trembling as I dialed 911, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. They assured me they would send an officer to check on me. While I waited, I locked all the doors and windows, my eyes darting around the dimly lit apartment. Minutes felt like hours as I sat in the darkness, my ears straining to hear any unusual sounds. Just when I thought I couldn't take the tension any longer, there was a knock at the door. I cautiously approached it, peering through the peephole. Outside stood a police officer, and I let out a sigh of relief as I opened the door. I explained the phone calls and the eerie voice to the officer, who assured me they would investigate. They suggested I stay with a friend or family member for the night, but I insisted on staying in my own apartment, not wanting to let fear drive me out of my new home. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept all the lights on and double-checked the locks on every door and window. My phone remained silent, but the silence only added to my anxiety. Around 2 a.m., I heard a sound coming from the living room. It was a soft scratching noise, like someone was dragging their fingernails along the wall. My heart raced as I approached the source of the sound. There, scrawled in jagged letters, was a message written in what looked like blood. "You can't hide." Tears welled up in my eyes as I stumbled back, my mind racing with fear and confusion. I called the police again, and they arrived quickly, taking the message as evidence. They assured me they would do everything they could to find the person behind the threats. In the days that followed, the police conducted an investigation, but the calls and messages remained a mystery. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and I became paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder. I eventually moved out of the apartment, unable to shake the terror that had taken hold of me. The experience left me scarred, a constant reminder that the safety of home could be shattered in an instant by the unknown and the terrifying. Fourth story, by James Carter. I had always enjoyed the peaceful suburban life in Southern California. My two-story house was my sanctuary, a place where I felt safe and secure. That feeling of safety, however, was about to be shattered one fateful evening. It was a warm summer night, and I had the house to myself. My wife was visiting her parents, and I was looking forward to a quiet night of relaxation. I had just settled in front of the TV when I heard a faint rustling sound coming from the backyard. I muted the TV and strained my ears to listen. It was a soft, rhythmic noise, like someone was shuffling around out there. My heart began to race, and I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet before cautiously making my way to the back door. As I peered through the glass, I saw a figure standing in the moonlight. It was a man, dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured by a hood. He was hunched over, his hands buried in the bushes. My blood ran cold as I realized he was trying to break into my house. Without thinking, I burst out the back door and confronted the intruder. He turned toward me, his eyes wide with surprise, and then he bolted. I gave chase, but he disappeared into the night, leaving me shaken and terrified. I immediately called the police, and they arrived within minutes. They searched the area but found no trace of the intruder. They told me it was likely a burglary attempt, and they advised me to be cautious and keep all doors and windows locked. I followed their advice, but the incident had left me on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that the intruder might return. That night, I slept with one eye open, the baseball bat by my side. A few weeks passed without incident, and I began to relax, thinking the intruder had moved on. But one evening, as I was watching TV again, I heard the sound of footsteps on the second floor. I knew I was alone in the house, and panic surged through me. I crept upstairs, my heart pounding, and that's when I saw him again. The same man from the backyard, standing at the top of the stairs. He was grinning, his teeth glinting in the dim light. I yelled at him to leave, but he just stood there, his eyes fixed on me. In a surge of adrenaline, I charged at him, swinging the baseball bat with all my strength. He dodged, and we grappled in a violent struggle. It was a terrifying ordeal, but I managed to overpower him and push him down the stairs. He tumbled and crashed to the floor, and I wasted no time in calling the police once more. They arrived quickly, and this time, they apprehended the intruder, who turned out to be a deranged individual with a history of break-ins and violence. The experience left me scarred, and I couldn't shake the image of that man's sinister grin. My once peaceful home had become a battleground, a reminder that danger could lurk just outside our doors, even in the most idyllic of suburban neighborhoods. Fifth Story, by Laura Davis. I had always been drawn to old houses with character, and when I found a beautiful Victorian home for sale in a historic part of Savannah, Georgia, I couldn't resist. The house had tall, ornate windows and intricate woodwork, and it felt like stepping back in time. Little did I know that my fascination with the past would lead me to a chilling discovery. The house had been empty for years, and I relished the opportunity to bring it back to life. The first few months were filled with renovations and restoring its former glory. I loved every moment of it, and the house began to feel like my own. One evening, as I was exploring the house's nooks and crannies, I noticed something peculiar. In the corner of the basement, hidden behind a pile of old furniture, was a small, narrow door. It was almost as if it had been intentionally concealed. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I cleared away the furniture and, with a sense of anticipation, opened the door. A dimly lit corridor stretched out before me, leading to a room that had been forgotten by time. The room was small, with dusty, cobweb-covered furniture and faded wallpaper peeling off the walls. It felt like a relic from a bygone era. As I explored further, I discovered old photographs scattered on a table. They depicted a family, but their faces had been scratched out, as if someone had deliberately defaced them. The more I delved into the room, the more unsettling it became. Strange symbols were etched onto the walls, and a sense of malevolence seemed to hang in the air. It was as if the room had been used for something dark and sinister. I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease as I spent more time in that hidden chamber. Strange noises echoed from within the walls, and I began to have vivid, disturbing dreams. The room seemed to exert a malevolent force, and I couldn't escape its grip. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a voice whispering from the hidden room. It was faint and incomprehensible, but it sent shivers down my spine. I knew I had to confront whatever was in there, so I mustered my courage and entered the room. In the dim light, I saw a figure standing in the corner. It was a shadowy presence, its features obscured. I demanded to know who or what it was, but it remained silent. As I approached, the figure began to move toward me, its movements unnatural and unsettling. With a surge of terror, I fled from the room, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it and called a priest to come and bless the house, hoping to rid it of whatever malevolent force had taken hold. The priest performed a ritual, and the house fell silent once more. The hidden room remained locked, and I never ventured near it again. The experience left me with a profound sense of unease, a reminder that old houses, no matter how charming, can hide dark secrets from the past. Sixth Story, by Daniel Mitchell. I had always loved the quiet suburbs of Illinois, and my small ranch-style house was my pride and joy. It was a typical evening in my peaceful neighborhood, and I was looking forward to a relaxing night at home. Little did I know that the events of that night would shatter my sense of security. It was a chilly winter evening, and I had settled in front of the fireplace with a good book. The snow outside muffled any sounds, and the house was enveloped in a serene silence. As I read, I heard a faint creaking sound coming from the hallway. I dismissed it as the house settling, but then the sound grew louder. It was as if someone was moving through the house, their footsteps deliberate and purposeful. Panic welled up inside me, and I slowly set my book aside and crept toward the hallway. The lights were dim, and I strained to see any movement. That's when I saw him, a man, tall and menacing, dressed in dark clothing. He was moving through my house, his face obscured by a hood. I felt a surge of fear as I realized I was not alone. Without thinking, I called 911 and whispered my address to the dispatcher. The intruder was moving closer to me, and I could hear his heavy breathing. I retreated into the living room, my heart pounding in my chest, and I grabbed a fireplace poker for protection. The dispatcher assured me that the police were on their way, but it felt like an eternity as I waited in the darkness. The intruder was getting closer, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. I could see the glint of a knife in his hand, and terror gripped me. Just as the intruder reached the doorway of the living room, I swung the fireplace poker with all my strength, striking him across the chest. He let out a cry of pain and stumbled backward, dropping the knife. I seized the opportunity to flee the house and waited outside for the police to arrive. When the officers arrived, they apprehended the intruder, who turned out to be a career criminal with a history of break-ins and violence. He had targeted my house at random, and I had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The experience left me shaken, and I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of vulnerability in my own home. The suburbs had always been a haven of safety for me, but that night had shattered my sense of security, a stark reminder that danger could strike when you least expect it. Seventh Story by Rachel Adams. I had recently moved into a cozy apartment in Jersey City, New Jersey, and I was relishing the independence of living on my own. It was a typical evening, and I had just settled in front of my laptop to catch up on some work. Little did I know that my night would take a chilling turn. The apartment was on the third floor of an old building, and my window overlooked a narrow alleyway. It was a quiet neighborhood, and I had always felt safe. But as I worked on my computer, I noticed a movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look at the window, and my heart skipped a beat. A man was standing in the alley, staring up at me with an intense, unblinking gaze. He was tall and wore a hood that obscured his face, making it impossible to see his features. I felt a wave of unease wash over me as I realized that the man had been watching me for some time. I had no idea how long he had been standing there or what he wanted. My first instinct was to call the police, but I was paralyzed with fear. I closed the blinds and retreated to my bedroom, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know if the man was still out there, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I called a friend and asked her to come over, not wanting to be alone in my apartment. As my friend arrived, I explained what had happened, and together we mustered the courage to call the police. They arrived quickly and searched the alley, but the man was gone. They took a statement and advised me to be cautious and keep all doors and windows locked. The presence of the stranger haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he might return. I installed security cameras outside my apartment and became hypervigilant, constantly looking out the window. Weeks passed without incident, and I began to relax, thinking that the man had moved on. But one night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a soft tapping on my bedroom window. My heart stopped, and I slowly turned to look. There, in the dim light, was the man again, his hooded face pressed against the glass. He was tapping with long, bony fingers, his eyes fixed on me with a predatory intensity. I screamed and called the police once more. This time, they arrived quickly and apprehended the man, who turned out to be a deranged stalker with a history of harassment. He had fixated on me for reasons unknown and had been watching my every move. The experience left me scarred, a constant reminder that the safety of home could be shattered by the presence of a stranger. My cozy apartment had become a battleground, a place where I had to fight for my peace of mind. 8th story, by Michael Wilson. I had always enjoyed the suburban life in Dallas, Texas, and my small 2-story house was my sanctuary. It was a typical Friday evening, and I was looking forward to a quiet night at home. Little did I know that my peaceful evening would be disrupted by a chilling message. The night was warm, and I had the windows open to let in the breeze. I was in the middle of watching a movie when my phone pinged with a message. I picked it up, expecting it to be a friend or family member, but the message that appeared on the screen sent a shiver down my spine. It was a photo of my living room, taken from outside my house. The curtains were drawn, and the room was illuminated by the soft glow of the TV. The message that accompanied the photo was simple and menacing. I see you. My heart raced as I stared at the message. I knew I was home alone, and the realization that someone was watching me from outside was terrifying. I immediately called 911 and explained the situation, providing them with my address. As I waited for the police to arrive, I locked all the doors and windows and turned off all the lights in the house. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and I huddled in the darkness, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic. Then, just as I was about to call 911 again to check on their progress, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside the front door. My heart leaped into my throat as the doorknob jiggled, and I heard a low, sinister laugh. I knew I had to act fast. I retreated to the kitchen and grabbed a knife, my hands trembling with fear. The intruder was now inside the house, moving through the darkness. I could hear his breathing, heavy and labored, as he approached the kitchen. With a burst of adrenaline, I lunged at him, the knife glinting in the moonlight. There was a struggle, and the intruder let out a cry of pain as I managed to slash his arm. He stumbled back, and I seized the opportunity to flee the house, my phone still in hand. I ran to a neighbor's house and called the police again, telling them that the intruder was now inside my home. When the police arrived, they apprehended the intruder, who turned out to be a disturbed individual with a history of stalking and violence. He had fixated on me for reasons unknown and had been watching my every move. The experience left me scarred, a constant reminder that the safety of home could be shattered by the presence of a predator. My suburban house had become a battleground, a place where I had to fight for my life. 9th story, by Olivia Rodriguez. I had always loved the charm of San Francisco, and my cozy apartment in the heart of the city was my haven. It was a typical foggy evening, and I had just settled in front of the TV with a glass of wine. Little did I know that my peaceful night would be marred by a series of eerie occurrences. As I watched TV, I heard a soft, rhythmic tapping sound coming from the kitchen. I muted the television and strained to listen. The tapping continued, and it sounded like it was coming from the refrigerator. I felt a wave of unease wash over me. I cautiously approached the kitchen, my heart pounding, and opened the refrigerator door. Inside, I found a glass jar of pickles, and the tapping sound was coming from within the jar. It was as if something was trapped inside, trying to escape. I watched in horror as the glass jar shook and vibrated on its own, the lid twisting and turning as if possessed by some unseen force. I slammed the refrigerator door shut, my mind racing with fear and confusion. The strange occurrences didn't stop there. As I returned to the living room, I heard a low, guttural growling sound coming from the bathroom. It was a sound I couldn't place, like a mixture of animal and something otherworldly. My heart raced as I approached the bathroom. I pushed open the bathroom door, and what I saw sent chills down my spine. The bathroom mirror was covered in fog, and through the condensation, a message had been written in clear, elegant handwriting. "You're not alone." My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the message. I lived alone, and there was no explanation for how it had appeared. I called a friend, my voice trembling, and asked her to come over, not wanting to be alone in my apartment. As my friend arrived, I explained what had happened, and together we mustered the courage to search the apartment. We found nothing out of the ordinary, but the feeling of unease persisted. That night, as we lay in the darkness, I heard the sound of footsteps moving through the apartment. It was as if someone, or something, was pacing back and forth. I couldn't bear it any longer and called the police. When the officers arrived, they searched the apartment thoroughly but found no sign of an intruder. They suggested it might have been a prank or a result of stress. But the eerie occurrences continued in the following days, with objects moving on their own and strange shadows flickering in the corners of my vision. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone in my own home, and the experience left me with a profound sense of unease. My cozy San Francisco apartment had become a place of inexplicable terror, a reminder that sometimes the scariest things are the ones we can't see. 10th Story, by Ethan Williams. I had always enjoyed the laid-back atmosphere of Portland, Oregon, and my spacious apartment in the city was my refuge from the world. It was a typical rainy evening, and I had just settled in front of my computer to catch up on some work. Little did I know that my night would be disrupted by a disturbing phone call. As I typed away at my computer, my phone rang, and I answered it without thinking. The voice on the other end was low and raspy, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "I know what you did," the voice said, and then the line went dead. I stared at the phone in shock, my heart pounding in my chest. The message was vague and unsettling, and I couldn't fathom who it could be from. I checked the number, but it was blocked. I tried to shake off the unease and continued working, but I couldn't concentrate. Just as I was about to call it a night, my phone rang again, and I reluctantly answered. "You can't hide from me," the voice whispered, and then the line went dead once more. My hands were trembling as I dialed 911, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. They assured me they would send an officer to check on me. I locked all the doors and windows, my apartment now feeling like a fortress against an unknown threat. Minutes turned into hours as I waited for the police to arrive. The tension in the apartment was unbearable, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Finally, an officer arrived, and I explained the phone calls and the sinister message. The officer took a statement and assured me they would investigate. They suggested I stay with a friend or family member for the night, but I insisted on staying in my own apartment, not wanting to let fear drive me out of my home. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft scratching sound coming from the bedroom window. I froze, my heart pounding, and slowly turned to look. There, on the other side of the glass, was a figure, a man, his face obscured by a hood. He was scratching at the window with long, bony fingers, and his eyes bore into mine with a malevolent intensity. I screamed and called the police once more, and they arrived quickly. The man had vanished, but they assured me they would continue their investigation. In the days that followed, the police were unable to trace the calls or identify the man at the window. The experience left me scarred, a constant reminder that even in the safety of my own home, danger could lurk in the shadows. My spacious Portland apartment had become a place of terror, a reminder that sometimes the most chilling threats come from the unknown. Thank you for joining us for the whole video. That video you see on screen is one of my favorite. Check it out. If you've enjoyed these horror stories, show your support by hitting the subscribe button. Did this tale send chills down your spine? Let me know in the comments.